If you don't manage it well, you're going to miss deadlines. The more you do it, the more frustrated the GPO gets, and they remember that. You manage upward, right? You manage upward to the VPs or the executives saying, I need this support, and here's why. If we miss these deadlines, it's going to hurt our chance to actually get a contract or even a renewal. This is the most uncomfortable part of negotiating your contract is
Dan, one of the big things that we do at MedBridge is to help people navigate the contracting process, right? And the first part of that is RFI and moving to an RFP, right? So I want to just discuss that today. What is that process like, and then move into how to navigate it. But let's start with, what is it? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, the RFI process, the RFP, it's taxing. I think one thing that companies don't realize if you're just getting into GPOs is how long that process can be. GPOs will sometimes start as much as 18 months before start of a new contract. So think about that. 18 months maybe, you probably get about a year to, a little over a year of negotiating through the process. So how do I even get there is first part, right? So you definitely need to apply to all the GPOs and get set up as a vendor. And then find your categories and say, hey, these are categories that I'm interested in that I could play in. And then you can click on, you can find their schedules right on their websites, and then you can click on it says, I want to sign up. So when the RFI opens up, you'll be notified. Now the RFI, right, let's define that process. It's a little bit different in the scheme of things. It's the same, but it's a little bit different per each GPO. They upfront a lot of information, but the kind of mid to final stages definitely changes for all three of them. So you got to understand that structure too. So you don't want to assume it's the same thing every time. But the RFI will come out whether you're invited or you're on this list, and it's just that request for information. Yes, I want to participate. You probably get 2 weeks to say I want to do it, and then you're in. And then the RFI packet's delivered, and they start asking a lot of questions. So where are you manufactured, company structure, sales reps, IDN team, who are your distributors, what do your sales look like within their GPO, right? Who your key customers are, what products you're selling, and then we'll start asking maybe some EPP, like environmental questions. So environmental safe, if you're diversity, MBE, cybersecurity questions, all these things start coming out. And they'll give you maybe a month to answer that question, and then you'll go through kind of getting it all like loaded up online, and then they'll review it, and if you meet criteria, then you're asked for a full proposal. So when that proposal comes in, then they have more product questions, but then they start giving you they want to know about pricing, or they want to give you your tier structures, and then depending on the GPO, you may get the red lines at that time, but if some others will wait till a little bit later in the process and start giving you the red lines, the T's and C's to go through. So that's a whole nother negotiating phase of getting all the contract stuff in place. But there you go. So you get your kind of entry point, your RFI, your RFP, and then sometimes there's you get everything loaded up online. They'll come back with best and final. Sometimes they won't, right? But so you got to think about that strategy of knowing your GPO. Will they give you one more shot if you don't think you're the best price or the best value prop or anything like that? And then a final decision's made, contract signed, and that signature usually comes, I'd say, about 4 to 5 months before the start of the contract, and then they launch it internally to their members. They announce it 3 months before the contract starts. That gives everybody time to understand if there's going to be new players, they're going to lose a vendor, or if they're going to go sole source or something like that to readjust, so that come start date, and then the compliance can start being measured and pricing can go into place.
Take me through again what RFI, which of those requirements were RFI and which were RFP, and I know it varies, as you said, but what are the time frames for those two things again? Yeah,
so the entry point, you use about 2 weeks to say, yes, I want to participate. The RFI can be somewhere around a month, roughly. That's the request for information where they ask company information, SKUs, environmental stuff, structure, right? So you get about a month to get that all put in place and put back in the portal. Then often I will say that there's extensions because someone's running late and they ask for it, they'll say, okay, we'll kick it out 2 more weeks. But call it a month and a half to get that RFI done. And then the RFP, which is the full proposal. And that's usually another month and a half to get that done. Once you're pricing your tiers, value adds, supply chain efficiency, things you want to put in there around your language. And then once that's done, and you keep moving, you're not guaranteed the next phase, right? So just because you got in the RFI, you might not get to the proposal phase, and then you might not get to the red line phase, right? But as you keep moving on, then they'll give you that red line phase where you get your legal involved to start getting the contract ready. If you are awarded, then they'll make signature.
Okay, great. So from your experience, what's the workload breakdown between the RFI and the RFP? I mean, how much work comparatively are we talking about?
So it's a shift in like who's involved, but it is a tremendous amount of work. It isn't just filling out some forms and you moving on. There's probably 15 to 20 documents that are in this packet that have to be filled out. Some of them are easy signatures, like who is your distributors, no problem. But when you start getting into manufacturing and locations, and let's say you have 1 or 2 SKUs, you can get through it. But I've managed contracts that had 300, 400, 500 SKUs. And that category is multiple products, and we have multiple locations of manufacturing. That's different, like, all the G10 numbers, all the packaging strings, you have different case quantities each, then you have different manufacturing, whether it's in Mexico or China or Taiwan or, China or, you know what I mean? You got to have all that in there. So you have to have your regulatory team filling all that in. You have your ITs involved for like continuity plans. You've got cybersecurity things you've got to answer. So depending on how many resources you pull into it, there's a lot of people that can be involved in getting everything fully answered. HR from a structure standpoint, sales or finance, I should say, to pull sales, to pull ASP pricing, top counts. And then that's your RFI. Think about that, right? That's just the RFI part. Then when you get the RFP part, now you got to start thinking about, which you should be doing already, but now you got to put your tier structure in place. So they'll always give you a suggestion. Access price, $10,000 to $50,000 in spend, $50,000 to $100,000 in spend, and 80% compliance, something like that, right? They'll throw some examples up there. This is where you got to look at your spend of all your accounts and say, what can we afford? Because if you've never had a contract before, or you're migrating maybe some tiers, you got customers with pricing all over the board, right? So now you're bringing price parity to their membership, which is great for you in the long run, but can be very painful up front. So you're working with finance, you probably have a pricing team, right? You probably have to get the CEO sign off on different margins. You have to work with your supply chain team and your regulatory team to make sure that you can accommodate this from a ramp up time period. And will you get better costs if you grow, and what percentage you think you'll grow? So what do we have today? What's our market share? How much will we grow if we get this contract? How comfortable we are with our margins? So that's a lot of time that goes back and forth. And there's a lot of people that are involved, like high up, right? So it's a very expensive phone call, like meetings that you're having to navigate how to come up with what price you want to offer. And then if you're going to do a value add, if you're going to do, an example would be like early conversion, like 2% for the first 6 months of the contract. Anybody that has new sales will give a 2% bonus to. Or growth incentive, anybody reaches, X dollars or X percentage in growth over the first year, we'll give a bonus, right? But those are value adds, but you got to build all of that into your strategy, and that all has to be done within 30 to 45 days, maybe 60 days. So getting everybody on board and getting that structure and understanding what you want to offer as far as a pricing proposal isn't easy. It might sound like, 3 tiers, throw some pricing, let's go. But if you're dropping, your biggest customers, I'm just going to make it paying $1, your ASP is $2, right? And now all of a sudden you want to put a contract together and you don't want to give everybody $1, but you also can't make them go from $1 to $2. It's really hard to say, how are we going to do this? How are we going to handle these big guys how are we going to meet the mediums, the everyday, I guess the tier 2, tier 3 is like the bulk of the contract. And then the ones that aren't really buying, let's give them a fair enough price that they'll be interested, but it's still good margin.
Yeah. I want to return to the pricing team and how you structure that, but I want to ask a more general question to begin with, which is, how do you make sure you have the right people? How are you navigating this internally, making sure that people are available when you need them for that 30-day period? What best practices have you found?
Yeah, so it's a national accounts manager, a strategic accounts director, even a GPO manager or director. You are the quarterback, you are the project manager, and you've got to look at the holistic approach of what it's going to take, and you have to manage through this process. You have to. If you don't manage it well, you're going to miss deadlines, you're going to miss information, and asking for extensions seems like the easy answer, but the more you do it, the more frustrated the GPO gets, and they remember that. So I will say, before we dive into the rest of this answer, it actually really matters to the GPO, those who are on time, those who are well organized, those who communicate well. And occasionally you need an extension, yes, but if you're always the one that is asking, or you're late to the game, they remember that, and they might not invite you back. Yeah. So keep that in mind. It's very important to be upfront.
We think about a brand for the physicians and the hospitals, but there's a GPO brand that's being created. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So think about, all right, how do we best navigate this? Best practice I can say is have a kickoff meeting. All right, so identify early on, if start, and you get better as you do them, and they'll change constantly, but identify the structure, who needs to be involved. You're going to get the packet. You're going to have all the files you're going to need to know to fill in. So you're going to send this out to everybody that you feel is important. So you have regulatory, you have finance, you have supply chain, you have sales, you have HR, IT. Like, everybody's going to have a piece of this that you're going to have to fill out. So ask the leaders, like, who do you want to assign to this RFI process? And some people are going to have multiple categories, especially if you're a smaller company, right? You are in multiple hats. So you might have 2 or 3 of these sections to fill out. But set those parameters early to say, listen, this is the due date. Have a launch meeting, go through all the sections on the call, and assign them in an Excel sheet with due dates, and send that out up front, and manage that up front, and say, listen, you have to meet these deadlines. And then have check-ins on Fridays, right, if you need to, in the week, or the beginning of the week, however it works for you, but have weekly check-ins up front and saying, hey, how are we progressing? Do we have any hurdles? Do we have any information we think is going to be really hard for us to pull in this time frame? And get that cadence going so that everybody's kind of paying attention to it. Don't forget, everybody's got multiple jobs, right? And they're going to be busy with their day-to-day work. And these things, a tough part of navigating an RFI and RFP is getting everybody to realize how important they are. So you got to get buy-in from the leadership.
Now, you mentioned the buy-in from the leaderships a couple of times in a kickoff meeting, and we've talked about 3 or 4 stages, depending on how you look at it. Where is that kickoff meeting happening? When are you figuring out who all needs to be involved with an RFI?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. I mean, one, when you know the RFI is going to come out, like, if you're talking with the GPO and you got a good idea, start the process as early as possible, always. Sometimes you might not really know, and they might say, hey, next 3 months, this has happened before. Next 3 months, we're going to launch it, and the next day I get it. I'm like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that, right? So now you're scrambling. But I would say, and if you are, even if you don't have a contract and you're constantly asking about your category, try to get as much information of when they think they would launch. You can start building out some of the strategy of an internal RFI, RFP tree, right? What is that tree going to look like, and who all should be involved? I would also like leadership calls within the meeting. If you're working with your VP of Health Systems or VP of Sales, or you have a direct line to senior leadership, say, hey, when is the next leadership meeting? Can I get a couple minutes of the time to talk about the RFI process, and please help be part of this conversation to get assigned people from their teams, and say, listen, we're all going to stay on this cadence. Document it, put a quick little presentation together so they understand it, and say, I need your buy-in so that when we have these meetings that they're staying on. This is part of their task, right? They've got to be involved. Because what happens is if you start sending this out as an email, it gets lost in email, right? It's going to get shoved down 20 emails, and they're going to see it on Thursday afternoon, and you're going to have a check-in call, and they're like, I didn't get to it this week. Okay, we still have 10 days. Can you get to it next week? Sure. Well, then you check in on Thursday again. Crap, I didn't get to it this week. Well, now you only got 3 days, and they're dropping everything to do this, and then that VP is going, why is my person not doing their job? They told me, you called me on a Friday at 2 o'clock saying this is due Monday, and now everyone's pissed off. And it happens all the time because it's just a breakdown in conversation. So buy in at the leadership level so they know what you're trying to accomplish and how important it is to stay on time, and let them be part of it. Having blind copied or just copied on the email chain, whatever is good too. But at least it sets the scene that everybody, you manage upward, right? You manage upward to the VPs or the executives saying, I need this support and here's why. If we miss these deadlines, it's going to hurt our chance to actually get a contract or even a renewal.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of project management type work, and you mentioned our quarterback. Is that who's doing all of this?
If you have the luxury of an admin, then great, right? Let them help you navigate that constant pushing out of, hey, don't forget I need this part by Friday, and setting out the emails and trying to keep everybody on deadlines. If you don't, you do. You can do it all yourself, right? It is a lot of work, but that's part of the job. I mean, it's part of the fun. Is like the behind the scenes part of being a national accounts director. A lot of people don't realize how hard the job is. It is a lot of work to do our role. But when you do it well and it runs smoothly, look at the big contracts you win, right? It's not a side story, right? But one of the things that when I first started in sales, I sold DMG needles, and if you got a $20,000 account, it was massive, right? And then we got into IOM, and we start seeing $100,000 accounts, and we're like, holy smokes. And then you get into, IDN selling, and you start seeing $250,000 accounts for like multiple products, and you're like, this is awesome, right? And then you start talking about $1 million contracts, $10 million category, $50 million categories, and you're trying to play in this, and you're trying to capture, multi-million dollars. There's nothing more fun to see, like, you just keep thinking bigger in your strategy, and when you're in national accounts, how much bigger the prize can be. So yes, there's a lot of unfun things to do, and people don't realize that, but when they see you come out the other side with a large win, that feels really good.
Yeah, I bet. It takes a lot of leadership too, right? Yeah, so going to the RFP, you talked about thinking through the pricing, the tiers. Are you going to offer any incentives? And needing a lot of leadership, right? It makes sense. You're talking about margins for the company in a big way, and those are very expensive calls, as you said. Like just thinking about the hourly cost of everybody on the particular phone call. Yeah, can you tell me? Just tell me about that. Like who's on the teams when you're really hashing out the nuts and bolts of the contract, and then how many calls are you on with senior leadership? What does that look like?
Yeah. It's going to differ for the size of the company and who's involved, right? Sometimes the CEO makes the final decision, and they might be on every other call. But well structured. You have your pricing team. You're going to have someone who represents kind of maybe each channel. If you have, say a non-acute channel, you've got distribution channel, you've got your acute channel, you've got your sales leaders, your marketing leaders, and then someone from finance. Like that really rounds out the conversation of looking at it from different angles. If you have, again, depending on your resources, you might actually have someone who's in charge of pricing in general. And they should be on the team too, so they can look at rebates and contracts that are out there already, or if your distribution side, what's the in the stock price, right? So understanding some of these things. So when you're promising a tier, your best tier at this low crazy price, is it lower than another GPO? Is it lower than a sole source contract? Is it too low that you're giving back a giant rebate, which is going to throw off your monthly cycle of dollars, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's important to think about from a finance standpoint what impact some of these prices would have. As an IDN and a GPO manager, you want to think about how you're going to work with finance. And what's the company margin you need to stay at? If you kind of know those kind of goals up front from your leadership saying, hey, we're not going below 20%. We're not going below 50%. I don't know, everybody's different, right? And how do you build from there and you work your way up? But then what other fees and what other expenses do you want to put into that? Because I can tell you from early on in my career, we looked at just the landed price of the product and said that's good enough. And then as I worked through my career, we started looking at, well, we got to look at total cost. We want to look at overhead. We want to look at how it's affecting EBITDA, right? We really dove in. And one of the sheets that we used, it went from A to like ZF. And it was insane, but it had everything. I mean, we had SKUs, prices, all the GPOs, all of our VA contracts. You can't forget, you can't go below the VA. We had landed margin, we had total cost, we had our distribution fees, what our price was to each of the dealers, and then we had the rebates that we had to pay on them, whatever their fee was. Then we had the GPO fee, we had the value add fees. We would have the rep commission, we would have other things around manufacturing, and it would spit out an end result, right? So you're looking at going, well, I mean, it only costs us X to make it. That's a 70% margin. But then when you look at it from an EBITDA standpoint, maybe it's only 25, right. And you're like, oh, that's not good enough. Yeah. So then you start tweaking. So that is a very deep, detailed way of getting to there, but every company's going to be different on how they look at their finances and what's important. But think about the amount of conversations and the amount of time you're having with that finance folks and then pricing team, right? And then, hey, here's where we're landing. Is our CEO going to be okay with this, or is the CFO going to be okay with this? So who's going to have that conversation? Is the VP of Health Systems? Is the whole pricing team going to bring them in, or do you need to have that one-on-one? So you gotta really have that buttoned up so you can show that you've got a control of, hey, this contract is going to cost us this, but here's the sales we're going to get out of it. Here's the market share we're going to capture out of it. Here's why we're doing it, and buttoning all that up. And that's all getting done in 30 to 45 days.
You mentioned the bottom line margin as one of the major considerations, obviously. But when you're going into a contract with multiple tiers, you don't really know in advance which tiers everyone's going to land in your ultimate customers, right? Mm-hmm. So how are you forecasting what the real margin will be for everybody?
We've done a couple of different things, but I think the most common way that I've always done it from my experience is we just build a model, right? So you build what your tiers are going to be like. You got to play with it, because sometimes you're changing it by $10,000 or sometimes you're changing it by $100,000, right? But so build out 3 or 4 tiers and try to be consistent with all your GPOs. Don't do 3 on Premier, 6 on Health Trust, or they would never go for that. But and then 5 or 6 on Disney. Try to be very consistent within one, across the board, 3 to 4. And if you want to do some hidden tiers, but try to be as consistent as you can. It helps you down the road in your market price and maintaining your ASPs and all that. But model it out and say, okay, here's where I want to start. Here's the spread of the accounts that I feel like for this product. In your marketing, this is why marketing should be involved to help with market sales, maybe intel that they have. But I'll just take something that I would know well. It's like laryngeal masks, right? So a $0 to $10,000 account, it's fine. They're small, they can happen, but they probably be my access. And then like 10 to 25 is probably pretty good. 25 to 50 is really good, and like 75 and above are like really big hospitals. You're not going to get a small surgery center to fit into that 75, right? So just building out that structure, and then you say, okay, I look at my current roster and what their sales are, and because you get the roster from the GPO, and then I plug it into the model, and then you say, okay, of our 300 accounts, whatever it is that's buying, 70% of them are probably in tier 2. Maybe, right? They're probably in that kind of $10,000 to $25,000. And then what is it going to take to get them out of that 25 to that 25 to 50? And do you have a pathway to grow it? Or did you make that 20, instead of it being 10 to 25, you made it 10 to 75? And everybody's just going to be in tier 2 and no one's ever going to get to tier 3. So it's not a very good contract, right? But what's that impact, right? What does your margin look like at each of those tiers? And then you start tweaking it. You work with finance to say, hey, if I drop this to 25, I'm going to move 20% of that to tier 3. We're going to take a little smaller margin, but like it's really easy to grow 20% in sales to get them in there, 10% in sales, whatever. And then, you know what I mean? So you start modeling out that process that allows you to get a better handle of what the impact's going to be.
That's helpful. Yeah, thanks. You mentioned access price just then, but you had stated that the GPO would give you a recommendation, right? How often do you use that recommendation, or is it accurate to your business?
So the business that I've been in, they usually 0 to 5 or 0 to $10,000, and we usually leave it around there. It's pretty accurate,
okay,
right? And that way I look at it is you don't want to make tier 1, and they probably wouldn't accept it anyway, like just retail, like just your highest price possible. But it's okay if that jump from tier 1 to tier 2 is 15 or 20%. Because think about it. I know if you're starting out and you want a contract, you want to be aggressive, you want to get everybody, but if they're not committed to you, don't just give a price to a non-committed member. And even if it's a multi-source contract, 3, 4, 5 vendors, you want to drive consistencies, and you want to try to drive compliance to your contract. So, hey, for a little bit of commitment, we can get tier 2, and you can get much better price than just tier 1 access. Everybody in the GPO is going to get that access price. So it's not like you can say, hey, I'm going to give you a really good access price just to get started, but if you're not committed, I'll just put you on retail. You have to give them that tier 1. So give them something that is, they buy it if they need it, or but they're not committed. They're not committed. So make tier 2 the starting point of your commitment, and then work your way down.
You have mentioned redlining a couple of times, or them sending you the red lines. And can you just explain a little bit more about that? It sounds like it fits later in the RFP process, or when you're completed with that. But what does that look like? What are you meaning by that?
Yeah, so you'll get a contract, right? All the languages that they give you, it's their best language that supports that GPO the best. And they'll tell you, hey, don't change it too much. Our lawyers don't like that. Yeah, no, but our lawyers also don't like a lot of language in there too. So you have to go back and forth. This is the most uncomfortable part of negotiating your contract, is language that you're not comfortable with. And that can be your out clause, that could be your payment terms, and there's so many other things you do, just small words that your lawyer. So when you go through your red lines, right, it literally is what they would call is, when you go in your Word document and you scratch out, or rewrite, how you want it to say. And that might go back and forth. It can go back and forth dozens of times, right? Depending on the language and how much is marked up in there. If you have an in-house counsel, or if you have an out-house counsel, start thinking about terms that you want to accept, and then you try to keep them consistent every time a GPO contract comes up. Hey, these are the ones we have to say no to. Here's the ones that we would like to say no to, but we'll give at the end. And here's the ones that we don't care, right? Have that identified, help speed up the process. But yeah, you'll get a couple weeks to go through back and forth. Each of the GPOs kind of deliver it at a different time. Sometimes they give it right up front in the entire packet, so you have longer to work on it. Others give it to you if you make it to that proposal phase, then they give it to you, and you start working on that. And that's the last thing that's due. I'll say Vizient and Premier, they go through the process. It's one of the last pieces, but it's very towards the end of actually getting the award. Usually if you are getting the T's and C's, you have a really good shot of winning. Doesn't mean you are, but you're in the finals. Health Trust, you get everything up front, and you fill it all out, you negotiate it, and they lock it in, and then you don't hear from them. It's like almost a longer quiet period. And then they go to vote, they go to the committee, and then they call you and say, hey, you got the award, we're signing this and we're sending it back, right? So theirs is buttoned up front, where the others, they do it in segments throughout the whole process.
So how does the red line negotiation happen with Health Trust?
Same thing. You get a window, and they give it to you, and they say, hey, this is our red lines, don't change it. And then you go back and forth with your contract manager and legal and say, these are things that we have to change. It just happens early in the process. You'll probably get that contract right away in the packet so that you can start working on it, but they're going to have that due a lot sooner, where the other two, you get it, and then you don't really you got to get it in, you get it finalized, but it's towards the end once you've kind of made it through the longer process. Commitment, and then work your way down.
That's great. So we've talked about a lot of quarterbacking, a lot of project management, getting people involved in leadership especially. What have you found in addition to what we've talked about now to help in that process? Anything?
What do you mean, like navigating the process of the RFI, or?
I guess the project management side of it. Are there any sort of tactical things that you could share with the audience to do?
Just keep a lot of records. Keep your folders really clean, right? Understanding, who's going to be kind of like your best ally in your company to help you support these. So, keeping someone that has all the files in one place that you can go back to and find them and reference to them. Create a share folder or, in Teams or SharePoint or something that you can create really good RFI RFP documents and save everything. So you can go back and reference them. One of the hardest things, and it's very common, right? Every time you do this process, you start over again. You go back and you say, hey, last time we did this pricing, but that was 2 years ago, so all of our margins have changed, or we changed ideas of contracting, but then you're like, well, which one did we do, right? So keep really clean records, SharePoint folders, things you can save it. Have someone be in charge of that. And if as your team grows and as your contracts grow, are growing in not only in dollars for success, but you get more of them, right? You go from 2 to 6 to 10 contracts. You want someone who has a bank of it and all in one place, and that's really help. You need someone to help be that admin for you long term.
Okay, great. And so when you get the next contract from the GPO, you mentioned make sure you have your documents in one place and you go back and look. Is it typically the similar language between contracts?
Timing wise, usually. I mean, if you have multiple contracts, multiple categories, usually it's the same. You can try to align them, but I will say that sometimes, like if you are in like nursing versus physician preference or distribution, they all could have different language in those. So just because you have one GPO contract, it doesn't mean that every single one of them are written the same. And then through cycles, they change language a lot, right? When there was a clause or whatever that a lot of them put in before, is like, you will not pass any taxes from the government onto us, right? Or now with tariffs, there's not maybe necessarily tariff clauses, but there's like about price increases. They've removed anything that you could even promote a price increase on, or they've taken out like force majeure or something like that. But these things happen, they change. So you got to pay attention to what the next packet looks like and what the difference is from the last one you signed to what this one is.
So you as the quarterback, do you need to be the one looking for red flags to send to the lawyer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should. I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot, but I mean, it all depends on the structure you have. Some larger companies that have a lot more in-house, that goes off to like a paralegal almost in-house, and they go through and they redline it, and then it goes to legal for final approval. But I can tell you, in my early days in doing this, I was the one reading the red lines, and I'm like, holy smokes, I don't know some of this stuff. But I talked to leadership, and what are the things that we really want to look for, and we got to that first. And other companies just sign it. They're like, you know what? We want a contract so bad, we'll just sign it, don't even change it. Right? But don't do that. Don't do that. Go through and look at it. Don't do early pay, or negotiate why you're giving them early pay bonus, or why you'd give them net 60 versus net 45. Negotiate those things to your advantage. So do read it. But as a national accounts or a GPO manager, you should read through it and know what the things that you really don't want to do. Get that done out of the way, and then send it on to the next, maybe your legal department. Again, that'll speed it up too. You want to try to get ahead of the game as much as you can, so that when the deadlines are getting there, you're not stressing as much.
As a national accounts director, how much of your time is spent on the RFI and RFP process for GPOs? It's
going to be different for, I hate saying it, I think I've said it a lot today, right? It is always different. That's why it makes it unique, is that every strategy you do is going to be a different approach. Because when I think about the answer here is, if I'm dedicated to GPOs, right? I could have one or two of these RFIs, or I could have 6 or 7, and it could take 75, 80% of your time navigating. Think of all the things we've talked about. You're in charge of everybody that section and making sure everybody's in charge and getting everybody on time and get everything loaded up into the template and back onto the online filing. So it could take a lot of your time. And then, oh, by the way, you have to be out managing your other contract leads, and you're supporting the sales team and so on. So from a GPO time, it's really, really, like that could be your whole job. It really could be a person that's dedicated just to GPOs. I did a hybrid role for a long time in my career where I managed Premier and then 40 IDNs. Now, I had to do the bids, and I had to do all that quarterbacking. And then, oh, by the way, I was the IDN strategy guy going out in the field calling on the IDNs up and down the East Coast. So that was a hard balance because I've got 2 jobs basically. I love the hybrid model with less IDNs because you know your contract up and down, and then you know how to sell at the IDN level and how to train your reps to sell your GPO, right? I love that model. But as you get bigger and more contracts, it's a lot of time. So I really do, you really need someone who's focused on the GPOs and then someone who's focused on the IDNs. You got to find separation there.
Okay. So for someone moving into this role of GPO Contracts Manager, this, what we've talked about, is extremely important for them to get a handle on.
100%. 100%.
Great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.